Who are you and what's important to know about you?
Yeah, so I'm a writer, actor, um, early career researcher, um, as well now. I'm doing a PhD at the University of Central Lancashire, looking at the use of film and theatre in the training of health professionals. Um, I've been creating film and theatre that's been used as training materials, particularly around mental health, and more recently, as you know, with synesthesia, for several years now. Before that, I was an engineer, so I was in the Royal Air Force for 7 years as an aircraft technician, and then did a few years as a service engineer, drive in the UK, and then I retrained as an actor in my late 20s. Always with an eye on, I think I saw art as something I can do to open up conversations and to ask questions and to get people to think differently about things. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to create things that ask, yeah, that open conversations and potentially made a difference somewhere, hopefully for the good. So, yeah, that's I suppose a bit about my life. I suppose there's obviously a lot more, but I think that gives you an idea in the context of what we're talking about. I think.
Where do you find your roots? I mean, lots of playwrights are there, dead and alive, who are trying to pull and push society in different directions, being aggressive, I mean, being provocative, being absurd. Where do you find your roots?
I would say I'm not so much driven by particular kind of art forms or methodologies. I've kind of formed my own practice as I've gone along. I think my roots are more in my, I suppose, my political ideological beliefs that I think were probably shaped by being brought up. I'm brought up very much in a kind of left-wing socialist family. You know, my dad was a politician and only a local politician, but he was very passionate about it and brought me up with that kind of ideology, I suppose, and it's something that I believe in. Um, yeah, the importance of society and caring for each other and redistribution of wealth and things like that, and fairness and things like that sort of thing. So I think that was something that I was angry about, I suppose, when I decided I wanted to retrain and be an artist. I was angry about the lack of equality in the world and about the suffering that was kind of written off and all the different inequalities that there were, particularly not just financially, but in terms of rights in different countries and with different cultures. So anyway, that was kind of what drew me into retraining in the arts. And I think then through training as an actor, I found that fascination of how acting gives you the ability to spend some time in someone else's shoes, in someone else's life, and to feel what they feel, understand what they're going through, understand what the reasons are for their decisions and their choices, to feel that. And I think that was what made me then, I think, focus more in terms of psychology and mental health and empathy and how if and that fascination with how stories, if we truly understand someone's story, we have a better idea of understanding them and their experience and what they're going through. And that individualistic, I suppose, way of looking at it. And that was something that I think has stayed with me and has prompted me to go into more creating work, which is about mental health and and human experience, I suppose, to try and get people to empathize with the diversity of experience throughout, yeah, throughout humanity.
If we very conventionally divide all the playwrights and theater directors or any type of performance artists into two camps, like some of them are like soothers in trying to polishing social issues and trying to make them acute and unite people. And the other camp is like disturbers. I mean, someone who make the wake. I mean, the kind of ripple effect in society,
Hmm.
just to shake us up towards a vision, a new one, a new state. I mean, state of mind. So, which camp do you are you in?
I would say I would like to. I think the thing is, I do struggle straight away with the binary element of that question, I suppose, in terms of, that there's one or the other. And I think, and I would say as well, I know you said that you'd watched what's available on my website, and I know there's only there's mainly just sort of clips and trailers on there rather than full pieces. I think there's one full film on there, which I don't think is really reflective. That Never Forget One, I think you might have seen a 2 minute short. That's not really reflective of my wider work that I'm more passionate about. I suppose that was a side project. But I would say that to make an impact and to create those ripples and to be provocative and to create change, I think you have to entertain. You have to amuse people. You have to captivate people, and I think that's something that I think sometimes work can come across as a bit worthy because it's so serious and there's no room for this to be fun to spend time with. And I think I'm quite interested in finding that balance between, I'm more than happy for someone to come into a play or a film thinking, this feels fun. This feels like I'm just going to sit back and relax and have a good time here. And then an undercurrent and something else that can grab them and can provoke them and stay with them. And I think that helps you not only get under people's skin, but I think it also potentially helps you to reach a wider audience of people who might not want to watch something that is political or aggressive or, provocative. Provocative or political, that kind of sometimes there's a stigma about work like that that might feel a bit worthy. And I watch TV dramas now and it feels very much about ticking all the boxes that TV producers want. It's about crime, it's about policing, but there were little political messages sneaking in there that you can tell the writer cares about. So I suppose it's how far down which spectrum you go, I suppose. I think there's a risk of going, I'm just going to make a play that or a film that is just 100% political and critical. And it might not get seen by anyone, but you've kind of stood up with your integrity, I suppose. So I try and find the balance, I would say. I think there's a place for being fun and for entertaining and even soothing and helping people to come to terms with, some sort of change of opinion or change of view, something that they might have held, and caring for the audience member in that way. But I certainly wouldn't want to create something that had no intention to challenge or to ask questions. And I don't, yeah, I would veer away from that certainly.
Probably it may sound a bit strange, my next question. You said you're a former military,
Hmm.
and now this bridging, I mean, jumping into a very different domain of theatrical plays, working with short form of television, short form of cinema. Um, any transferable skills?
Any transferable skills from the military to the arts? I'm sure there must be. I think I'm very, I suppose punctuality is something that I think is underrated quite often in the arts. With some people I've come across, I'm someone who absolutely sticks to time and has discipline, I suppose, in some ways. So I think that's one thing that I've perhaps taken from the military. But I suppose, there are things that I learned in the military that would help in terms of helping me understand people who've been in the military, so that's one thing that I have brought to my art. I've brought that understanding of people that I've worked with and lived with. Um, the sense of humor, I think, as well, that comes through the military, I think has probably crept into a lot of my work. Sometimes quite a dark sense of humor, quite challenging and risky sense of humor sometimes. That can be quite shocking, but that can sometimes provoke some interesting responses. Um, yeah, I think those are probably the main things I think. And I studied as an engineer, so the scientific element. I'm still interested in the science and I'm still fascinated by science. That's not gone away since I've discovered art as my main love.
Okay. As far as we're here on the topic of synesthesia, when did you first put a name to it and just came to know what this is about?
So yeah, I had no previous knowledge of synesthesia until several years ago, when I was already working on the play, and there was a character Joseph in the play who at that point was very much on the autistic spectrum, and he was, I suppose, inspired by my son and his experiences growing up with a diagnosis of autism and some of the messages that he was getting and the things that he struggled with and some of the messaging that I was giving to him as a father and me questioning those messages myself as to whether I was giving him useful kind of guidance. And also reflecting, I suppose, on my own childhood and whether I would have been diagnosed with autism if there was more awareness of it when I was younger, with the things that I struggled with, looking at my father and my brother and similarities there, I suppose, in terms of our behavior. So that was a fascination for me. And that was the seed of the play was about what is normal and who gets to decide. That was the big question that sits over the whole play. But then I started to um, look at different experiences, and I just happened to come across an article about James Wannerton and his London Underground map, where he'd renamed all the stations with the tastes, with his taste synesthesia, and I found it absolutely fascinating, and um, asked James if I could speak to him because I wanted to ask this question about, you know, why do we decide which unusual experiences are unwanted and which ones are something that we see as appealing or exciting or intriguing in a positive way? And I think, there was another character in the play who was Joseph's sister, Aisling, who hears voices. And voice hearing is obviously something that has a lot of stigma attached to it, and people are quite fearful of it, predominantly because of media representation and reporting in the media. And I thought, well, what about if there was an unusual human experience that people would generally see as, oh wow, that sounds great. I would love to do that. That sounds fascinating. I'd love to have a try of that rather than be fearful of it. And that's, I suppose, the feeling I got when I read about James and then started to read about more forms of synesthesia that I'd perhaps heard little things around but hadn't put a name to it in the past, like when people hear music and see color and things like that. And so I reached out to James and asked him if he'd be prepared to talk to me about his experiences, and I was delighted that he did. And he's been on board ever since, helping me to get that character right and to get the details of his journey and his experiences right. And that's been just a fascinating journey for me. And meeting other synesthetes like Micah and Caitlin Hover in the United States and her experiences, it's just been a world has opened up to me. It's been fantastic.
So the main thing I taste is words.
So not just names,
No, just words, all words.
all of them.
Yeah.
Wow. And so what's that like? Is it like you hear a word and it reminds you of a taste?
No, I actually taste it in my mouth
That is so cool. And it's like, when are you doing this?
all the time.
All the time. So you're doing it now?
Yeah.
Oh my God. That is awesome. Oh, what does awesome taste like?
Awesome. It's a bit like banana, but it's fizzy, like a fizzy banana milkshake.
Yes. So what does banana taste like?
Well, it doesn't taste of banana. It's like burnt peas. I don't really like it.
Oh. So what's your favourite?
Oh, I can't tell you that.
Oh, come on, Joseph. I won't tell anyone.
No, I really can't.
Okay. But, well, what does it taste of then? Just tell us that at least.
It's like if you took the best chocolate cake that you've ever eaten in your life and then times it by 1,000. The richest, sweetest, softest, loveliest thing you could ever imagine.
So go on, how is that useful? I mean, God, it sounds like loads of fun, but I don't know how you'd use that.
Well, like I say, the main thing I taste is words, but I taste other things too, like shapes and colours and light, anything you can see,
Oh
really.
my God, I can't believe you've never told anyone this before. This is literally the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. Sorry, go on.
Well, as you know, I'm an architect, and it's my job to do most of the design work. I use the taste thing when I'm designing. Every feature has its own taste, and if it's a pleasant taste, it stays. If it's unpleasant, it goes. And that's how I design. That's my secret.
How did you start your collaboration with Micah regarding the screening of your play now in Austria in this February? How did it all start? How did it click?
So the relationship with Micah started actually after the play was first performed, which was in November 2022. And I was added to the synesthesia Facebook group by James Wannerton, so that I could reach other people in the community and let them know about the play, because he was very positive about the play. And then I noticed quite soon in joining the group that there was this post from Micah about her podcast, which was starting imminently. And I was, obviously in full social media mode and reaching out to people as far, as many times as I could. And I reached out to Micah and said, "Oh, I've got this play. I've been added to the group by James. I wondered if you'd be interested in talking to me." And thankfully she was, and she watched the play, and then I appeared on her podcast, which was fascinating, where we talked about the play and talked about the results that we'd had, and particularly obviously the elements of synesthesia and mental health. And that was how it came about. And there was another fascinating element to that, how we talked about James Wannerton's realization through watching the play that he actually hears voices as well, which is something that he'd never talked about before. And that was just mind-blowing for me, that somebody who'd spent so much time talking about and advocating for synesthesia and his, that unusual human experience that he wanted people to understand and to feel empowered to talk about and connect with other synesthetes, that he never felt able to talk about his voices. And without me knowing that, I'd somehow recreated his experience of voice hearing in the play as well, in another character, which is just fascinating. And then that brilliantly, for me, resulted in Micah interviewing James again on the podcast to talk about that specifically, which was just wonderful to open up those conversations.
So how do you take, from your perspective and experience, should people flock together, or if they have like autistic traits or synesthetic traits, or is it good or bad?
I think it's it's certainly a positive experience for people to collect together. So for instance, and I know this is slightly different, but I've done a lot of work with military veterans and military veteran mental health with some of my films. And a lot of the work I've done in helping military veterans post-service who struggle to reintegrate into civilian life, I've noticed that a lot of veterans flock together and form a protective bubble where they don't trust civilians, and they will have that little bubble around them, and they will add little services here and there, and they will feel safe because they feel like they're with people that they can trust. And that is obviously positive, because it helps them to get out of their house, it helps them to stay safe and to rely on each other. But what it also does is it can separate that person from the wider society and can close them from other relationships, other services that might help them, because they intrinsically distrust other people outside that bubble. And so I think there's certainly a place to having that protective space amongst people with common experiences and common beliefs. But I think that for me, it's also important that those people are supported to explore beyond those boundaries and to reach other people who might not initially understand them at first glance. But what I have found is that the more you get people to talk and to share their stories with people who they might not see as their kin, those common, that there are commonalities and there are common experiences. There's emotions connected that we all feel, that we can all recognize if we take time to understand people's stories. So I think coming back to the synesthesia community or the autistic community, or whatever we're talking about, I think it's superb that people, with particularly with the rise of the internet, people have been able to reach people and groups who celebrate these common experiences and can share not just obviously the positive elements of that, but perhaps more importantly the things that they've struggled with and get comfort from that. But I think it's also important that we don't just kind of other people by doing that we can also bring everyone together to kind of say, yes, there are people with similar experiences, but I think we are all united. If we talked enough, we are all united in the fact that we are all different. We all have our own secrets. We all have our own individual ways of experiencing the world. And I believe that passionately. There's not a group of normal people and then several groups of not normal people around that. I think we're all in one big, beautiful mess that we'll never fully understand, and an infinite number of spectra that we all sit on in different places. And I think the more we talk and share our stories and be confident and interested in each other's stories, but confident to share them safely without judgment, I think we will better be able to integrate and celebrate the diversity of society that we live in.
You've picked up and developed a very unusual line of collision, not between people and characters, but probably there is something, but I didn't pick this up. I didn't get that. But between a certain type of artificial intelligent health monitoring system that you call Vigil and neurodiverse people. So how come? I mean, how did it come about? How come that you came up with this very unusual collision?
Yeah, so I definitely see I did want to obviously bring in the element of the AI voice, the Vigil character, and aware that kind of dehumanizes that in some way. But I think that Vigil is definitely supposed to represent something that is already there in society, and represents the people who are in power of that, who program that, who create that. And so Vigil's views, Vigil's rules, Vigil's programming is led by the people who are in power. So I think Vigil definitely represents powerful people and powerful interests. So I don't think it's completely disconnected from people. I suppose I'm more interested in that collision between people and the people in power over them. That's kind of my main thing. I think that I'm interested in exploring in that way. I think in terms of, I think that's probably the main thing. I'm trying to expand on that.
Hello, Aisling. Apologies for the delay to your appointment time. I'm afraid we're very busy today.
Oh, that's okay.
Would you like a complimentary coffee? We have latte, cappuccino, espresso, americano, or maybe you'd prefer to choose from our selection of
I've just
teas.
had one, thank you.
Very well. What is the reason for your visit today, Aisling?
Oh, I'd rather just discuss that with Dr. Connolly, if that's all right.
You are booked in for an initial consultation and diagnostic assessment, which I will be carrying out.
No, I don't think so. I made a request to see Dr. Connolly, and then you replied with this appointment time.
Our diagnostic assessment tool has been approved for initial consultations for 6 months now. In 95% of cases, it performs better than the average human doctor.
Sorry, I'm just not comfortable.
Lucas, I'm dealing with it.
I'm just not comfortable discussing this with you. It's quite complex, you see, and I always see Dr. Connolly. He knows me. Is there any way you could just rearrange for me to see him? I don't mind coming back another time.
Dr. Connolly no longer works at this practice.
Oh, wow.
Oh no, I hope he's okay.
I didn't know that.
It might reassure you to know that I have full access to your entire medical history.
No, that
Get
doesn't reassure me.
out.
Shut up. Why would that reassure me?
Having access to your records will assist me in providing an accurate diagnosis and recommended course of treatment.
No, I don't want that. Look, sorry, can you just refer me to see a proper doctor? Is Dr. Khan still here?
Initial consultations with a human doctor are only available as an optional extra to patients with a silver policy or higher. You are covered by the state-funded basic health insurance. Would you like to upgrade to a silver policy?
No. Next question.
How much is it?
What? Shut up.
Would you like me to calculate a quote based on your medical history and current circumstances?
Yes, please.
One moment, please. Today we can offer you an initial 3 months of cover with our award-winning silver health insurance for just £675.
Oh,
Would you
is
like to
that
proceed?
all?
Oh, wow, that's a lot more than I thought it was going to be. No, sorry, I don't really think I can afford that at the moment. Are you sure that's the only way I can see a real doctor?
Initial consultations with a human doctor are only available as an optional extra to patients with a silver policy.
But do you think that this type of normalization, generally, does it come from people in power, or is it maybe just the other way around? Power comes from the norm.
I think it's probably complex again. I think it's probably both ways. I think that normalization and predictability is useful for the ideology that is in power, i.e. capitalism and the growth kind of model, in terms of people want to have reliable, predictable, uniform workers who are normal and easy to predict, who are going to turn up at 9 o'clock every day and finish at 5 and not be off sick and give 7 out of 10 every day reliably so that they can predict their output. I think that suits the system, and I think that people who fall outside that kind of spectrum struggle within the system that we have, and I think that that's when people struggle to fit into that system, is when they face problems, because they become less employable. And then they become assessed in terms of, well, why are you not employable? Why are you relying on benefits? Why are we having to pay for you to be alive? And if we spot then things that are unusual, that are different, that are outside of the perceived norm that someone has decided on, then we might be saying, well, you need to be doing some work to get yourself closer to this norm so that you're employable. And that is on you. That's your responsibility. And that, I think, is fascinating, because I think that that's a story as old as time. That goes right back to, the useless eaters in the Holocaust, and the T4 program, and there's little clues in the play. There's phrases that are in there, and they're in there deliberately, because I think people won't notice them, and I think that's the important thing, is that we forget, and that these words come back in, like cockroach and useless eater, and we repeat that process again and again and again. And I think there's so much stigma around people, who don't work, who don't fit into that ideal, and pressure on them to find a way to fit in, to serve the machine, as it were. This is my left-wing socialist kind of roots coming through again now, obviously, but that to me is fascinating and scary, and urgent, and that's, I suppose, why that element is in there. So in terms of power, I think it suits those in power to maintain that model. I think that, who knows, there could be religious legacy in terms of how we think about normality and difference, but I think, to me, the more we feel free to talk about and understand each other, the more painfully obvious it is to me that we are all different, and that's a good thing. Yeah.
You know what? I watched the first time these 4 minutes from the possibility of color. And well, I watched it like lousily a bit, and I thought first, and then the idea really struck me, because I was wrong, but I was wrong in the right way, maybe. So, do you think, well, voices that people hear, well, at least from the literature and from TED Talks and everything else that I can judge by, voices are usually like domineering voices are that command you to do something. So this is something powerful, like regularly, not all of them. But Do you think that this vigil can be one of Aisling's voices in the end?
Yeah. So I think there is a deliberate reading of it. There is one part of the play where Aisling starts to hear two different versions of Vigil, and there's and there's the suggestion that there's the Vigil that we can all hear, and there's Vigil speaking directly into her head, and that could either be via the implant that she's had, or it could be because she's imagining it because it's a hallucination. But I think more importantly on that, as I suppose it in a way it doesn't matter because I think it's about what has caused that, what power imbalance has caused that. And talking about TED Talks, there's a talk that I watched by Eleanor Longden. I don't know if you've seen it, about hearing voices, which I think was the starting point for Aisling, the character of Aisling being a voice hearer, and how Eleanor Longden, when she started hearing voices, the voices were quite inert and quite passive and just sort of commentating on her life. Oh, she's getting up, she's moving the room, she's doing this, and it was just very dull. And it wasn't until she started sharing with people that she was hearing these voices, and the response from people she told, from friends and from medical professionals, was they were so horrified. They were saying, "You are ill. There is something very wrong with you. You have schizophrenia. You will be unwell for the rest of your life." And all the fear culturally around schizophrenia and voice hearing, that was the point that the voices started to become aggressive and to become controlling and to become almost, not violent as such, but asking her to do things that she didn't want to do, and became a problem. I'm not saying that's common for everyone, but I've talked to people in the Hearing Voices movement who kind of share that experience, and I'm not at one point. I'm not in any way saying that people don't have difficult relationships with their voices. Of course they do, but I suppose it's asking where that comes from, and it's asking also, where is the dividing line between someone who hears voices and someone who doesn't? We all have that powerful inner dialogue sometimes where we're having a conversation with ourselves, trying to work things out, trying to decide what to do, and compelling ourselves or feeling compelled by some other kind of influencer. So it's that complex, messy stuff that I'm getting into, I think, with the play in terms of, does it really matter what that voice is? And the other thing as well with Vigil was to also just flag that for people who hear voices, this, we're moving more and more into this world of relying on AI voices and things, and how much people who struggle with voices would struggle to interact with an AI voice and to be able to differentiate between the two, I suppose, if they can't see someone in front of them speaking as a human.
To develop on that, technology seems to have gone too far. But if you think twice, if you think back, starting from the invention of basic tools and using, say, self-code of writing systems and printing, we humans are kind of essential cyborgs. It's like upgrading ourselves externally seems like our insatiable instinctive urge, and unstoppable. So it's not the matter of choice. That's what I'm trying to say. And technology is advancing now in just encompassing more and more domains, seems to be, and enhancing the norm. Because when you think of technology, the trend is to be, well, the trend of its assistive assistive function is very strong. So why did you decide not to counterbalance this digital health sentient vigil along more constructive lines of technology being assisted?
I would say that if you watch the whole play, there are elements of that in there where we see Vigil being useful as a useful AI helper. There's a section quite early on in the play where Joseph's friend and business partner Helen is measuring him for a suit, and she's shouting out measurements, and the Vigil is recording them and keeping them in her diary, and it's all the kind of stuff we associate with, Siri or Alexa, that kind of AI assistant kind of thing, and how, when Aisling is going to speak to the GP, it's familiar. It's, oh, do you know what? This might help us get more access to healthcare because we don't have to rely on a person being there. We can just speak to an AI voice, but it's what comes with that, I suppose. So that element of it being assistive is there. And interestingly, obviously a big part of the play is about this implant that has been developed that normalizes the human brain, by the standards of what normal is that have been set, by whoever. But interestingly, after the play, when we've had conversations with people, and there is one character in the play who makes the case for having it and says, you know what, this is a good thing. This is helping me. This will help me, and I want it. I don't want to suffer. I don't want to have these horrible feelings anymore. I want to just have someone press a button and make it all good. And I think that's, making the case in terms of medication as well, or mental health as well. But interestingly, after the play, we have had people say, yeah, I would have it, and the play has this very kind of dystopian view of it and of how scary it could be for some people. And it's perhaps critical of it in most people's lens, but there are plenty of people that speak up after the play and say, I would have it, I would want that, definitely. And again, it's that complexity of it can be useful, but there are negatives that come with it as well. And yes, we are progressing at a rate that we can barely keep up with and keep track of in terms of monitoring and legislating to protect people. But I don't think very much it's out of the box now, and we're not going to be able to stop it. But there are questions to be asked as to what happens the more and more we replace people with AI technology and replace the things that we would do for ourselves. What do we do with that spare time that we should have? Or do we politically then have to find other things for people to do to keep them occupied and to keep them busy and working, as we replace their roles with technology? And also, what happens? What power do we have as workers if we can no longer work? That's another question that comes up for me. That's perhaps not in the play, but that's something I've been talking about recently as well. Sorry, I'm probably going off on tangents now.
On the topic of keeping identity, I mean, just slightly making this question a bit more abstract. In the previous interview with Pat, you said, like, what if this hypothetical implant is invented and is hailed as a panacea against neurodiversity? And now you're saying, so lots of people came up and said, I would take it, I would accept it, I would implant it because, and why this first, why is this so disturbing? I mean, this particular stance and this particular opinion that some people would go against their identity or not, or is it something else here?
I don't know if it's disturbing. I find it interesting. I can understand it. I can certainly understand it because I think as well, another thing that the play is asking is that, for people who do suffer, who do find life difficult, it's where does the blame lie, but what are the causes of that suffering? And I think there's a big shift, particularly in the West now, to encourage people to take responsibility for their own suffering and to diagnose. And I know that diagnosis is a very politically tricky subject as well, but and there's a lot of, and it's very emotive. But this idea of going, well, if you're feeling stressed or anxious or depressed, then that is because there is something wrong with you. There is something wrong with your brain, and here are some drugs to make you feel better, or maybe you can go for some therapy to get yourself better. And that therapy tends to be more towards correcting your behavior, CBT, rather than, trying to get to grips with the things that are making you sad, anxious, or or stressed. And I think that again is convenient for the people in power, because I think there's a hell of a lot of distress caused by the society that we've designed for ourselves, that we are propagating, that, you know, people are more and more depressed and more stressed and more anxious. There's more and more suicide. And I think to blame people for that and to put the responsibility on them to fix that is unfair, because I think we need to be looking at society, looking at ourselves as a society, and the contribution that we have to that, and what we would have to do to perhaps fix that and make life more enjoyable and more comfortable for people of all experiences, of all neurodiversities, not just those that are diagnosed or whatever. I think that we keep talking about this epidemic of mental health, and there's a reason for that.
So, yesterday, when you were at the hospital, I went for a consultation for the implant. And it was absolutely fine. They reassured me, told me everything was going to be fine, told me I was an ideal candidate for it. So, yeah, I'm going to go for it. And I'm really confident that it's the right thing to do, and I'm actually really fucking excited about it too. Oh, and because I am high functioning, they don't need a second opinion, which means I can get it straight away.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
That's really big news.
Yeah, but it gets better. I mean, I think it does. No, I mean, I hope you agree. Fuck, what's wrong with me? Okay, so they told me if I had a partner. They asked me if I had a partner, and I said, well, why do you need to know that? And they said, no, don't worry, it's fine. It's just that if you have one, well, they can do this thing where they pair the implants, which would, are you ready for this? Ensure everlasting love and companionship.
But you don't have a partner.
Oh, no, that's true. But it just made me think, you know? Christ, Joseph, you're not making this easy for me. It made me think about you, like us, like, you know, maybe we could...
Be a couple?
Yeah. Yeah, why not?
You like me?
Yeah, of course I do.
Why?
Well, because you're kind, you're caring, you're talented. Oh, and you're a bit older than me, but you know, the right amount, not the weird amount older.
Right, thanks.
Oh, and intimacy won't be a problem either, because it says here, where is it? Yeah, here. The type 4 implant guarantees appropriate levels of sexual attraction and libido between pairs for life.
Wow.
I know, it's amazing what they can do, isn't it?
So we'd both have it?
Yeah, and we would be paired for life, like penguins. How romantic is that?
Yeah, that's really romantic.
Okay, so what do you think, shall we?
And through staging and writing the possibility of color, what kind of issues have you gone through and probably dealt with, or what kinds of concerns have you tried to get rid of through writing this play?
I think one was certainly my conflict in terms of as a parent, because some of the messages that my son was given when he was growing up with autism were along the lines of, you know, from his teachers and from health professionals and even family members. They were saying things like, you need to fit in, you need to look at the other children and copy what they're doing, otherwise you're going to get bullied. You know, don't talk about Thomas the Tank Engine all the time, because people will get bored and they'll think you're strange and you won't have any friends, and all this kind of stuff that I found quite upsetting, because I saw him as this wonderful, interesting young man that was asking questions that I wouldn't think to ask, and he was very funny. And I wanted him to celebrate that and not feel like he had to hide himself away. So I was very much drawn to asking him to keep faith in who he was, and to to celebrate who he was and what he found interesting, what he was fascinated by. But I did always have that nagging doubt in the back of my mind that is this my ideology speaking here, and am I effectively putting him at risk of a world that is ideologically opposed to that and is quite comfortable with people being bullied and ostracized and othered for being different? Am I setting him up for a life of misery, I suppose, in some ways? So I think that was obviously the start of the play. So I think I've been able to confront that and challenge that, and I think I've managed to come to a point where I think I've more or less done the right thing and done the best that I can, but also aware that people have a choice. And I think perhaps my ideology sometimes needs to be tempered and to accept that how I see things and what I believe is important is not what everyone sees as important, and for them to have that right to choose what they see as what they want from their life as well.
And you mentioned that you insisted on your son's being himself, and yeah, and keeping all these and habits and traits that he retains, that he develops even through his autistic condition. How would you ascribe then your son's behavior into this very neatly constructed social fabric of interrelationships? Because, well, it might be annoying to someone, and this is kind of an issue that will escalate to another issue. So boundaries should be known. How do you approach this with your son?
I think I understand the question. So, sorry, I'm assuming you mean like kind of almost like agreeing on a common etiquette for us to kind of live by, a common code for us to live by, I suppose. Yeah. So I think it's for me, but there's so much pressure to fit into the norm that I feel that any drive to kind of push against that, which I think I'm perhaps focused more on, to push against that pressure to align to the norm. I think it it's never going to get to the point where it goes too far the other way. I don't think. I think and I think we obviously need some kind of rules. We need some things that we know we can just kind of come into a room and know how to talk to each other. But I suppose what I believe is that there is definitely room for us to be more open to different experiences and different opinions, different behaviors, without being so judgmental. And I think we've not. I don't know how we could draw the line between what's acceptable and what isn't. But I think it's just having more of a sense of openness to difference. And that probably sounds very vague, and perhaps that means I need to think about it a little bit more. But it feels like we're so far the other way that it's not even come onto my radar that we need to be careful we don't go too far once we cross a line or something. So all the energy is just about pushing to an imaginary point where it would be better.
And just on the topic of being open to this, because there is a very unusual view. It says that neurodiverse people are most likely to be one of the major sources of prophetic visions and messianic messages, and all these visionary activities and poetic imagery. And some of them are worked, okay. Most of them failed, but it's something that humanity, through these fringes, tries the new water of new steps in a culture. What do you think at this phase of human history, today, now, in the moment that we're living now and sharing this time with you and me? What are we looking now for on these fringes of the human mind?
Ooh, that is a huge question. I think absolutely culturally and creatively, we've relied on people who, yeah, do experience the world differently for once, you know, again, by saying differently, you're saying different to what? But yeah, in a creative way, like you say, on the neurodiverse spectrum, we've experienced a lot, and that idea about prophetic visions and, you know, all sorts of things comes into that in terms of religion and the amount of power that is wrapped up in religion and all those things. It makes it very messy to talk about. But I think at the moment, it seems to me that people who are genuinely creative and different and radical are becoming more and more stigmatized and more marginalized. And it's more about, depressingly to me, it's more about creative ways to make money and creative ways to advance the capitalist model. And that includes the development of AI as well. You know, it's all about how do I make more money more quickly with employing less people. You know, that's the depressing thing to me, that the creation of money seems to trump all else, and different philosophical ideas and beliefs and experiences and ways of living seem to be just more and more marginalized as just radical nonsense and problematic and even dangerous. So that's, again, the lefty in me, I think, speaking there. But I see less opening for that. You know, there's more and more censorship even creeping in the arts, which I associate with that kind of creative, you know, idea generation. Anything that becomes critical of the current political stasis is frowned upon more and more and pushed against more and more. So it feels quite dark at the moment, if I'm honest.
You know, I'm happy that you mentioned these two topics. Economics, a typical people, if they want to maintain their independence and adjust to typical lifestyles, they need more resources, obviously, on average, a typical person than a typical person. And how's this? Well, the limit should be provided. Who should decide? Who should construct the limit of resources that is allocated to this atypical demographic sector of people? And what should we take, you as a human being living with your son, with me? Who should decide and how? What should we take into consideration by reallocating resources?
Yeah, I think in terms of the cost of making things accessible and making those inclusive and making things equitable, we live, the real world is we live in a world that's ruled by economics, and we go too far one way, the markets get scared and value of everything plummets and chaos ensues and interest rates go up, blah blah blah. Well, we've just witnessed recently in the UK, particularly after, you know, Brexit and COVID and things like that. But I think there's always this. It's quite a convenient conversation, I think. In the UK, particularly, it's been traditional that the Labour Party or the left of the country have been more the party that kind of create more inclusion and help marginalised groups and are the voice of those that are kind of forgotten and less productive, you know, less economically productive, I suppose, in the views of, you know, the management side of things. Whereas the Conservatives have been more associated with helping people who create the wealth and giving them free rein to, you know, to create money and the argument is that then there's just a trickle down to the other people. You know, that's the way it works. But I think there's more and more argument that they say, oh, well, there's just not enough money to do that. There's just not enough money to do that. And whenever we have these conversations about maybe we could provide more money to help disabled people, to help making places more accessible, to help provide more inclusion, to make people more comfortable who are perhaps struggling, it always comes down to, well, we just haven't got the money for it. But there's a choice there. There's a political choice because, you know, there's more and more billionaires every year. The gap between rich and poor is increasing year on year on year at an exponential rate, and that's a choice. That's a decision that we go, oh well. We guard against that decision by saying, oh, if we taxed those people and redistributed that wealth, then those rich people would go to other countries and do it there instead, and we would be left behind. So we're at the kind of behest of those rich and powerful people. But at some point, there has to be a point where we go, that's not working, and we seem to be all kind of following this line, this story that's just the way it has to be, and that we have to just be grateful for what we can get from the rich and do what we can with those little crumbs. But we should have more than crumbs. We should be better off and more comfortable and have a better quality of life than we did year on year on year, you know. And that's something that I find frustrating, that we kind of just go, well, there's just a finite amount of resources that we can use. And in terms of how that applies personally to me and my son, you know, my son is now graduated university in media, and he did really well. He got a 2-1 in his degree, and he's a very creative guy, and he's passionate about that. But I'm aware that he's finding it very difficult to find work in the creative industry in media. And I think part of that is because it is such a difficult industry to work in, particularly for someone who requires order and requires certainty, because it is so chaotic and so demanding, and that the idea that you would have to have several jobs at once and have to juggle them and have to try and not know each day what he's doing and doing different jobs to kind of make it work. So it's set up that people who work in that industry, probably it's very difficult for someone who's neurodiverse to work in that industry. And then we're losing all those creative talents, I think, that would contribute to that sector. And so I'm going, do you know what? There maybe should be more work and more resources put into helping someone with those complex needs that my son might have to have a career in that industry. And I don't think that's about a leg up, that's about equity. That's only for the good of society, to make sure that everyone is involved and no one is left behind, I think.
And on the topic of censorship, you know, so writing about this edgy social issues is like, you know, dancing barefoot on a slippery slope covered in boiling oil. In your team, you've got an ethics expert in your production team. I saw it, and I see the result. And I found no negative feedback about your play. Obviously, I understand why. Yes, first, because it's good. And second, because you cannot just say anything negative against this, I mean, along the lines of an acute and edgy social issue. But in person, well, encountering your audience face to face, did you get any sincere and justified criticism, or probably even outright grudges against your position?
So far, I don't think I've had anything like that. I think the audiences have been fairly kind, maybe justifiable, you know, maybe it's justified that they're kind about it, that they're nice about it. Maybe it's not necessarily generous that I've earned that positive response with the play. There's been criticism, but more in terms of things like, you know, some people were unhappy with the amount of profanity in it for one, so that was a taste thing, I think, but something I'll take note of. Some people found that it was upsetting, particularly with issues that they'd had personal experience of and perhaps would have benefited from more of a warning about. So that's something else to think about. So I think it's more kind of on a personal level, really. I think ideologically, I've not yet come across anyone who's been opposed to it, and I'm encouraged by that, because I think I want the play to challenge people who have different views to me. I want the play, but I want it to do it in a way that is kind, and that is in a way that we sit in an audience as a group who are together, not as us and them, and to help people to connect emotionally to the characters and recognize themselves in the characters, and then through that help them to challenge their own beliefs, maybe, and their own political or, you know, professional stances. And eventually I do want to take the play to people who are more in a position of power, who might have different experiences of it. For instance, there's going to be a screening of the play for an audience of psychiatrists in the summer, and that's, I think I'm excited about that. I'm nervous of it, because I think that there's elements of this play which are quite critical of of the psychiatric medical model. So that will be interesting to see how that goes down. So I'm ready for that, and I hope that that happens. I'm very much not into theatre that is created in an echo chamber where it's just preaching to the converted, because that doesn't change anything. I don't think it just gives us a cuddle. And I want to provoke. I want to ask questions and start difficult conversations, but in a way where we can be kind to each other and to understand each other's perspective and each other's reasoning for our beliefs, I suppose, and sometimes quite opposing beliefs.
I will quote much here because I need to be precise. So, for instance, well let's go here. Tom Shakespeare, who's a UK scholar and disability rights activist, you probably know him, called Oliver Sacks the man who mistook his parents for a literary career. And another critic called Sacks's work a highbrow freak show. Dr. Sacks, when alive, he replied, I would hope that a reading of what I write shows respect and appreciation, not any wish to expose or exhibit for the thrill. But it's a delicate business, he says. You are in the same literary domain as Oliver Sacks, obviously, at least with this play of yours, the color, the possibility of color. How do you walk this shaky tightrope?
So I think that's something I take very seriously. Because I think as soon as you do some research and try and attempt to represent an experience other than your own, I think you take that responsibility to do that well and to do that sensitively. And I think there is a huge temptation to be exploitative, because you can, and the amount of things I've taken out of the play because they were exploitative, because they were maybe violent when they didn't need to be, or aggressive when they didn't need to be, or funny when they didn't need to be, and funny in the wrong way, funny that was punching down, not up. So I think time and time again throughout the development of the play, I've not only shared it with the people I want to reach with it, such as health professionals and student health professionals, to help influence them and their practice, but I've also shared repeatedly with people who have lived experience of the experiences that we're trying to represent, and to be completely open and ready, and encouraging them to be critical of the piece at every stage, to say, is this right? Does this feel right? Does this feel right to you? Is this something you would want student nurses or doctors to see? To help them understand what your experience is like. And we've had criticism where people have said that they wouldn't say that's not right. They would say this instead. And I've been very excited about that, and I've valued that and not seen that as a criticism. I've just seen that as normal, that I would get it wrong. Of course I would get it wrong, because I don't have synesthesia and I don't hear voices. So of course I wouldn't understand it straight away what it's like. So I've really valued that. And I think the proof that we're getting that right is that all the feedback we've had from people with synesthesia and people who hear voices and other perhaps characteristics that you would recognize from the play have said that they felt seen by the play, they felt less alone, and that they felt empowered. And then the empowered thing, I think, is the most important thing for me. That shows that we're doing it right. That it's doing the opposite, I think, of exploitation, and that's really, really important to me.
Play, as it's announced on your website and elsewhere, will soon become part of educational material in the courses for medical personnel.
Mhm.
First, well, two questions here, I mean, sub-questions. First, can you describe how it is designed to be implemented as part of this course? Just, is it just watching and asking, and what kind of emphasis is there? And another one is what justifies, well, in terms of sex, this is obvious, he was a medical doctor. But what justifies deviating from hard data illustration and evidence-based instruction to embracing fiction?
I think the way I've done it is, again, at every stage of development, I have shared it with students, and shared it with lecturers and health professionals to see if it was to see the questions that it was provoking and to see how it was landing, and to also make sure that it was accessible to people who might not be theatre literate and regular theatre goers as well. I didn't want it to feel like it was exclusive. So that was one of the things I've concentrated on. But I think when the very first film I made, which is about a military veteran with PTSD and just looking at exploring the day in his life and sharing his experiences, I just created that as a personal project, as a creative. I didn't see it as having an educational role, but that's just been taken on and had that role. People wanted to use it for that. So I've kind of followed those breadcrumbs and tried to understand more about why it works and how it works. And that's what my PhD is about, trying to understand what's going on and what is working differently there. So that for me is how I have made sure that it's landing and asking the right questions and being accessible. But I think I also have this belief that, theatre and film for education, I think sometimes it is seen as like a lesser form of art, that it's seen as it can quite often be a bit clunky and a bit rushed and a bit tick boxy and a bit one note. And I believe that for it to fully embrace the power of art to change people and to inform people and to challenge people, it has to be good art. It has to stand up as a piece of art in its own right. And so I create work that I hope will just be just as interesting and just as provocative for someone who's not involved in health and education as to someone who is. So it has that dual life, I suppose, as well as being, as I said before, empowering to people who recognize themselves in the play. So it's got that three-pronged attack, I suppose.
Thank you, Pete. Yeah, I feel so appreciative and grateful for this talk and for what you've been doing and your unusual, socially, minded, socially responsible approach to theater. And my last question here what might be like this. So what kind of message would you like to get across in this panel discussion or in this discussion in Austria in February when you're going to show your filmed play? And why should people come?
I think people should come because I think predominantly I'm just honoured to be a part of the event. I think Micah has done a phenomenal job with her podcast and raising awareness of synesthesia and bringing people together. I think it's incredible what she's achieved. And I'm honoured to have been asked to be part of it, genuinely. I think the thing that I'm most looking forward to finding out is how the messages of the play translate to people who are not, from my part of the world, who are not from Britain, and yeah, I think most of the people there will be from Europe, which will probably have very similar things, but there will be cultural differences, and to see how the language translates. We have got it in German subtitles for those that don't speak English. I believe most of the audience are going to be English speakers, so. But yeah, that's the thing I'm really interested in for me. And in terms of what I want people to take from the play, I think it's hard for me to say because I think everyone comes and watches a different play. Everyone brings what brings their own experiences to it, and then experiences the play in their own way. And I think that's, even though it's a recorded performance, it will be different every time for every single person. Even if people watch it twice, they will have a different experience the second time they watch it, depending on what's happening for them that day or what they've been reading. So that's something I find really exciting about storytelling. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing people's responses to it. In terms of who should go and watch it, I think it's sold out. So I think it's fully booked now. So I suppose people are just already going there. But I think the main reason people should be and are going there is to celebrate what Micah has done and the amazing achievement she has managed over the last year.